Great. So welcome to our Understanding Climate Change in Lower Athabasca River and Peace River Territory session. My name is Ali Greenslade. I'm an engagement coordinator and policy analyst on the Environment and Climate Change team, and I will be walking through the information in the session with you today. A few housekeeping notes. Please keep your mic muted. Feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat if you have any questions. We will have a time for discussion at the end. If you have any technical issues, you can email climate@métis.org or message myself. Also, as a thank you. Sorry, Noreen, I might just mute you. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Also, just as a thank you for your participation, everyone who attends and participates, if you're a citizen of Otipemisiwak Métis Nation, you will be entered to win, to receive one of $500 cash gifts as a token of our appreciation for sharing your time and knowledge. We'll be sending a feedback survey out after this with information on that. And before we get any further, to get us started in a good way, I'm going to invite Elder Noreen to share an opening prayer with us to help set the stage for today. So thank you, and over to you, Noreen.
When you
sounds like we have
do you get an echo when I speak?
Yeah, we are getting a bit of an echo.
We'll just have to live with it.
Hey.
Okay. Be grateful for every sunset and thankful for every sunrise, because every day is a blessing. Creator who leads us in ways we know not, through joy and sorrow, through victory and defeat beyond our understanding. Give us faith to see your guiding hand in all things, that being either lifted up by seeming success or cast down by seeming failure, we will go forward where you lead us. Be mindful of all the gifts Mother Earth has provided for us and to everything we possibly can do to protect and use the bounty usefully. Give us the wisdom to adjust to climate change, do our part when it comes to the prevention of forest fires and other events that are a result of the weather becoming less predictable. Creator, may we use the land and waters to our benefit in a good way. We thank you for the opportunity to gather this day. The information on the environment and climate change, we ask your blessing, and we ask your blessings on all the participants. Hi. I'm sorry, but there's so many noises, it kind of distracted me.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for your opening words, Noreen.
I hope you could hear the prayer.
Yes, we could.
Because I'm having trouble hearing you speak.
Oh, really?
There's an echo.
Is anyone else hearing an echo? Maybe just in the chat if anyone wants to chime in.
Only on Maureen's laptop or computer, whatever she's using, but when you speak, there's no echo.
Okay, so it might be something on your end, Noreen.
I would be at a loss to know what to do.
Well, I can take it from here at this point. Thank you again for your opening words, Noreen. That was a fantastic opening, and leads us kind of into talking about what the goal of today is in the session. So we've heard from Métis citizens that they're witnessing changes to the land and the climate, from lakes getting warmer, forest fires, as Noreen mentioned, and smoke with those forest fires, even berries shriveling up. We've also heard that it can be really confusing with multiple sources of information available out there of what to believe about climate change. So a portion of today's session is talking about what climate change is and how it is affecting Northern Alberta. And then we will have a few poll questions throughout the presentation to kind of gauge people's concerns and kind of familiarity. And at the end, like I said, we'll have some time for discussion. And finally, we're doing all of this to build a report and a story map, a kind of living document to talk about, to understand climate change in Alberta and its connection to the Métis Nation. And so I just wanted to mention that within that report, we're hoping to, further amplify citizens' voices. So just for your awareness, there is somebody here taking notes today, and we're hoping to capture some quotes for that report. So moving along, the plan for this evening, we're going to talk about kind of why we're here, who we are leading this presentation and this work, then get into the kind of information about climate risks and kind of a little bit of a background on climate change. Then we'll move into kind of our listening and discussion portion. And there will be a chance to ask any questions at the end and then kind of talk about all the information we've just heard and what the next steps are. Also, just to mention again, there will be feedback surveys sent out after this. If you have not registered on the Eventbrite, and I won't be able to email you after. So if you got this link from someone else or some other way, please just share your email in the chat and we'll make sure that gets sent out to you. And once again, thanks. We have a lot of information to cover tonight. So thank you for leaving any comments or questions to the end. You can type them in the chat, but we just won't kind of address them until the end. And speaking of questions, the question we would like to ask you all at the end, or kind of have you think about as we share this information, is thinking about how might climate change impact you, and what would it make you feel more prepared for those, things like whether it's wildfire, flooding. So just to preface you, that's the question we're going to be asking at the end. I also very much recognize that this topic can be hard. In a couple of the sessions we've done already, we've heard that it's, a little bit overwhelming. And I've studied and worked in this for a while, and I know it can evoke certain emotions. Just want to remind you that this process being here is entirely voluntary, and you are free to leave at any point, but we do really value everyone's voices. And really thank you for being with us here tonight. So moving along, we've chatted a little bit about what we're doing here. Thanks for those who've introduced themselves in the chat, so we can see kind of who is here. But we also want to introduce ourselves. So we are the Athabasca Métis government of the Métis Nation within Alberta's Environment and Climate Change team. Oh, that's a bit of a mouthful, hey? And we are here to provide services to citizens that are Métis specific and rooted in addressing the needs of the Métis within Alberta. So as I said, my name is Ali Greenslade. I've worked on the Environment and Climate Change team for just over 2 years. I myself am not Métis. I've grown up in central Alberta, spending a lot of time out at Pigeon Lake near Moskowitz, and I currently live in Amiskwaciwâskahikan, Edmonton and Fort Edmonton Métis district, amongst Treaty 6 territory. I have a background in environmental science and a master's degree in climate action leadership. And I've been fortunate enough to listen to many M&A citizens talking about environmental concerns. I recently, back this spring, I got to go up to Fort McMurray and Fort Vermilion to talk about the energy transition and, the energy sector. The citizens, that's where I had the pleasure of meeting Elder Noreen. So we're very, very happy to have you all here. We also have my colleague Beth with us today. I'll just pass it over to Beth to introduce herself for a moment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beth. I work with Ali in the Environment and Climate Change Department. as an engagement coordinator and policy analyst. I'm also a citizen of the Otipemisiwak Métis government, and I live in Edmonton as well, and that's where I'm calling from. I grew up here, but I grew up camping all over the province, so I'm very excited to learn more about Peace River area and Lower Athabasca. So happy to be here. I might be able to help with some technical difficulties throughout the session. I'll try, and possibly will be in the chat. So if anyone has questions, I'll help Ali answer them.
Thanks, Beth. There's also another logo on the screen. The Resilience Institute are our partners in this project, and they will be the experts sharing the content today. And just one last thing before I hand it over to them. Just moving along here, thanks. So why are we doing this? We're doing this for the next generation, for kids to see a greener future that is connected to the earth. This is one of the many quotes from information we already have, and I think it quite simply captures all the environment-related work we strive to do. So we're going to be learning a lot about impacts and kind of some negative things, but it's all part of a bigger process to kind of look ahead to see what's coming so we can be better prepared for the future generations. And with that, on that note, I will pass it off to trusted partners in this work who are going to help us make it happen. Over to you, Harry.
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Elder Noreen, for your words and for welcoming us into this space tonight. My name is Henry Penn. Rather confusingly, my parents have always called me Harry, so that's what I go by. I'm a senior research fellow at the Resilience Institute. I'm originally from the UK, and I lived in the US before coming to Canada, and I've been here for about the last eight years, mostly in the Yukon. But I lived in Calgary for 2 years, and I'm calling in from home, which is in the ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq people, otherwise known as Nova Scotia. My professional background is in civil engineering, but really I've focused on the last 10 or so years on supporting communities to find adaptation solutions to climate change, and particularly building community resilience to its impact. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Harry. I'd also like to offer my thanks to Noreen for opening us up with such a beautiful prayer, such a good way to start things off. So yeah, my name is Jeff Baker. I'm the Education Knowledge Mobilization Lead with the Resilience Institute. I'm Métis from Saskatchewan here. I'm coming to you today from the small village of Marcelin, about an hour north of Saskatoon in Treaty 6 territory. Before joining TRI, I was an assistant professor and chair in Indigenous education at the University of Saskatchewan. Was there for about 7 or 8 years. All of my research and teaching focused on helping teachers to respectfully and ethically weave Indigenous ways of knowing with science and technology. After leaving the U of S, I worked with the Cree community of Mistwasis Nehewak. I did some land-based education coordination, helped with their Bill C-92 Child and Family Services file as a senior policy analyst, and also helped to start an Indigenous food sovereignty program in the nation there. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm very happy to be here and to have a chance to share with you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Looking forward to sharing some information and having some good discussion. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of our presentation, I wanted to share a little bit about our organization with you. So we're an Alberta-based Canadian national charitable organization. Our team members are all across Canada, just like Harry and I are spread out. We have team members all over. The main goal and mission of our work is to minimize suffering caused by climate impacts, and we do that primarily with small rural and Indigenous communities who are often underserved or have the least capacity to adapt to our changing climate. So our team works locally and globally with diverse partners to strengthen resilience to climate impacts, and weaving local and Indigenous ways of knowing with science and technology is really a cornerstone of our work. One more slide for me before we pass things back to Harry here. So in terms of that weaving knowledge system, just wanted to acknowledge this idea of walking in two worlds, which I think a lot of Métis people are familiar with, having a foot in the Indigenous and a foot in the settler world. We have a quote here from the Métis Nation Climate Change Strategy that we are the bridge. We see the best in both worlds. We're open to new ideas. And for how to move forward and set things right, pardon me. On the right here, we also have another diagram. It's from Indigenous Resilience publication from the federal government, kind of expressing a little bit of what they've heard from working with Indigenous people across Canada. And to me, this all fits within this idea of Wakotoin. That's a Northern Michif or Cree term, referring to that sense of kinship, our kinship connections that we share, not just with our families and other people, but with other animals, plants, the water, the air, the land, and everything in creation. We all come from the same creator, so we're related to everything that way, and we have responsibilities to our relatives and all the different forms that they take. So if we start in that circle, just quickly kind of review this diagram. If we start on the left-hand side circle there, that lack of care and respect for Mother Earth is the root cause, and I think that's something we can all agree on. There's another Cree term called pastahuin, refers to stepping over kind of or breaking the natural laws, the guidance that Creator gave to us to follow of how to be good relatives and how to behave in respectful ways. And when we break those laws, the teaching that I've heard is that, those don't just come back on us, that comes back on our relatives, people that we care about, our children, our grandchildren. So for me, that's just another way for us to understand climate change. Harry's going to be sharing more of the science of climate change, but I just wanted to express that Indigenous people, Métis people, we also have our own understanding of climate change and why this is happening. And our organization takes both of those very, very seriously and respects both knowledge systems and is going to, do our best to bring everything that the Métis Nation in Alberta, as well as our scientific knowledge has to offer in terms of completing this report. So we move on. What's the remedy to this lack of care? Well, one thing we can do if we move clockwise around the circle is reconnect with the land and culture. Get back on the land, start pursuing our cultural activities again. Moving over to the next circle, when we spend time on the land, we can make observations. We kind of know what's happening. We get to know our relatives out there on the land and what's happening to them. And we can care for them, maybe change our behavior, change some of our practices. Moving over to the next circle, that creates healthy land and healthy people. Again, we're related. We can't be healthy unless the land is healthy. And of course, why are we doing all of this? And this goes back to the slide that Ali just shared about, having a green future for children. So the youth and future generations, what kind of world are we going to be leaving for our children, our grandchildren, and those yet to come? So with that and those thoughts, I just wanted to emphasize that a little bit, and even the projections that Harry's going to be sharing with us this evening. Those aren't just scientific projections; those are also created through observations from Indigenous people and local land using people from around the world. So just a couple of examples of how we're going to be trying to weave Indigenous and scientific knowledge together in this work. So with that, Harry, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. So we are going to talk, as Jeff has mentioned, about the projections, the climate change data projections that we have for the two different areas of Alberta that we're talking about tonight, and maybe what some of those what some of the impacts that could come from those climate projections are. But within the scope of climate change, within the subject of climate change, there's really a lot to get into. It's a huge topic, and it is far too big to cover all in one night, all its various different ins and outs and parts of it. So just to get it started, we're going to take a little bit of time to share with you which areas of climate change we're focusing on and why, and just go through a few climate change terms and concepts. So the first is weather versus climate, the distinction, the difference between weather and climate. So weather describes conditions such as things like temperature, humidity, precipitation, so whether it's raining or snowing or even clouds in the sky. And it does that on a place or a region basis, but over a short period of time, usually an hour to hour, day to day, or even in some instances, weeks to month. But it's that short-term weather outlook that we go to our favorite website, or we have an app on our phone that describes those conditions in our immediate area or in another area that we're looking to find out about. And so we know that weather can change dramatically in a place or in a region on a day-to-day basis. I mean, especially this time of the year, it's warm and sunny one day, it's snowing, wet and cold the next. And these are descriptions of the weather in whatever place we're in. Climate, on the other hand, refers to the average of weather conditions and over a 30-year or more time period. And so, for example, if we describe southern Alberta as being a typically windy place, we're describing an aspect of its climate. And so we see climate changes more slowly because it represents an average of weather over a longer period of time. And to sort of emphasize a little bit of what I've just said there, we can use an analogy, and we can use this picture on the slide in front of us all. And so weather, it tells us what we're wearing each day. And so, you know, hot days is one set of clothes, cold days is another set of clothes, bringing a jacket and being prepared for rain in the afternoon. These are all descriptions of the weather that we experience. Whereas climate is what we have, broadly speaking, in our closet. So as I mentioned in our introductions, I used to live in the Yukon, and so my closet was filled full of lots of sweaters and heavy jackets. Whereas I've got friends in the southern US, and theirs is going to be far more, lighter shirts and t-shirts and shorts and things like that, because that's what they can wear, more often, and as a reality of the climate that they live in. We're going to do our first poll.
Thanks, Harry. So kind of just to gauge where everyone's at in the room, we want to just kind of know, how familiar are you with climate change science? So you're very familiar, you could be taking over this presentation, somewhat familiar, or not familiar at all, that you're here to learn. Please feel free to answer. That'll help us or help Harry, I should say, kind of know how in depth to get for the next little bit. Just leave it open for another moment if a couple other people want to answer. So far, about half and half, a little bit more that are somewhat familiar, and some that are not familiar at all. And someone who's very familiar. They could take over if you need, Harry. Great, so we'll end it there. Pass it back to you.
Thank you. So the next key concept that we want to get into, and the reason for talking about greenhouse gas emissions is because these are really what's driving the temperature changes that we're going to see as we get into the projections when we talk a little bit about them later on in this presentation. And so we can understand the greenhouse, we can understand the impact of greenhouse gases by using a bathtub analogy. And so if you imagine that you have a faucet that is turned on, and like carbon or other greenhouse gas emissions, which come from burning of fossil fuels or cutting down of forests, just to name two examples, this carbon is flowing into our bathtub. And so it's like water being added to the bathtub. And so the more carbon we release into the atmosphere, the more the water fills the bathtub. And so the higher the carbon levels are in the atmosphere, which means the Earth's temperature is going to be rising over time. Just like if you let the water run too long, the bathtub gets higher and higher and hotter and hotter. On the other end of the bathtub, we have our drain, and these are our carbon sinks. So these represent natural processes like forests, oceans, the grasslands of southern Alberta, for example, that naturally remove carbon and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And so this drain is helping to release some of the carbon, just like water draining out of the bathtub. And so if the drain works well, it keeps the water level from rising too quickly. It keeps the carbon from rising too quickly in the atmosphere. But if the faucet is turned on too high, which is to say too much carbon, too much water is being added, and the drain is too small or it can't work fast enough, which is to say the carbon sink can't absorb it all, the forests, the oceans can't absorb it all, then the water begins to accumulate in the bathtub. The greenhouse gases begin to accumulate. And so the carbon, which is filling the bathtub, it doesn't just sit there, it heats up. So the more carbon that goes into the atmosphere, the more heat it traps, the more water in a bathtub, the warmer it may become. And so this increased carbon is what's leading to global warming and causing the effects of climate change that we're already beginning to experience. Once the bathtub overflows, these are the negative impacts of climate change. This is the spilling over of the water, the extreme weather, the rising sea levels, and the general disruption to our ecosystems. And so what is the world doing to deal with climate change? And there's two very broad approaches that we can use to deal with climate change. The first is mitigation. And so that's any action that will reduce or prevent greenhouse gas emissions. And the list here is seemingly endless, but there's a few examples that I'll draw on. So those are things like using renewable energy, like wind and solar. We can make buildings, vehicles, and equipment more energy efficient. We can walk, cycle, take public transport from time to time instead of using a motor vehicle. Waste management, reduce, reuse, recycling is an option. And then things like planting trees that actively absorb and store carbon from the atmosphere. The second approach to climate change is adaptation. And this is really what the focus of our work in this project is about, and much of the conversation can be about tonight and going forward. And these are deliberative actions by communities, by governments, by organizations in response to the current or expected climate change impacts, with the goal being that we're trying to reduce potential harm, or in some instances, take advantage of beneficial opportunities. So those are a few of the key terms and the reasons why we're using them in this climate change space. But before we get into thinking about the future, and Jeff touched on this in his introduction in the start of our presentation here, we need to think about what's gone before us and what's happening right now. And so a major part of this work is to do a desktop study, we call it, but to do a big overview of all the work that the nation has done in the past, that citizens have been able to contribute to, and use that as our starting point. And it's been a pretty significant undertaking. There's so much incredible work that's already been done by the nation. And so we've been looking for existing evidence of change across Alberta. And we found lots of key indicators, things like changes in air quality, the number of hot days, wildfires, droughts, all these different kinds of things. And these are Métis observations and notes about impacts that we're actively bringing in to this work and using as a foundation for everything that we're doing moving forward. I'd like to just share a couple of quotes from some of the work that we've been reviewing from Métis citizens. The first is forest fires, weather impacts, breathing issues, animal habitats forcing animals into cities. And that's from an ski engagement participant in 2023. And the second is Saskatoon berries are ripening late and drying out early. I believe that drought and heat waves, more extreme weather in general, is contributing to this change. And again, this was from a ski engagement participant in 2023. So these are some of the quotes, these are some of the stories and lessons that we're learning as we go through this work, and that, as I say, are using to help inform what we understand about what's coming next. And so thinking about that and thinking about what could come next, how could future climate change impact you? And to look at some of the potential future changes, we do this on what's called an ecosystem region basis. So we're looking at changes in ecosystem regions. And Alberta, as you can see from the map here on the slide, is split broadly into 6 ecosystem regions. And so an ecosystem region is a large area where the plants, animals, climate, and the geography all work together in a balanced way, forming a unique environment. And so these regions include boreal forest, which is the green area, Canadian Shield, which is the purple area in the northeast of Alberta. Foothills is blue, grasslands is orange, parkland yellow, and then the Rocky Mountains are pink. And so these individual regions each support specific species that are adapted to local conditions. So grasslands, your open areas with few trees, boreal forests, the colder areas, many trees, lakes, and wetlands. Now, when we say we're looking for changes in ecosystem regions, we're talking about a shift in these ecosystems. And that shift occurs when climate change or environmental changes cause one type of ecosystem to gradually transform into another. And so, for example, in Alberta, this could mean that warming temperatures would change forest into more grassland as areas become drier and warmer over time. And this shift does all manner of different things, but it disrupts the balance of plant and animal life. It disrupts the way that we interact in our day-to-day lives, how we can take on the things we want to in our lives. And species and other animals and plants all change based on these warmer, drier conditions moving in. And so the two territories that we're talking about tonight have their own specific ecosystem regions. So in the lower Athabasca River territory, we have boreal forest. So this is the region filled with colder forests, many trees, lakes, wetlands, and it's home to animals like moose and bears. And then the Canadian Shield. So it's a little bit more rocky terrain, forests and lakes, but where the land has been shaped by ancient rocks and glaciers. In the Peace River territory, a little bit of the same, but some additional ecoregions beside. So we have boreal forest again. So that's mostly in the northern part of the territory, colder forests, many trees and lakes. The foothills area is the area that sits between the mountains, so the early stages of the Rockies, and the plains, and is made up of a mixture of forests and grasslands. And so animals like elk and deer are going to be in this space. And then parkland. And so this is a mixture of forest and grasslands, but a far more diverse plant life. And this is typically the ecosystem region where the majority of Alberta's agriculture happens. So we're going to talk now about what's happening, what is the same across all of these ecosystem regions. But first, another short poll question.
Yeah, I just want to check in. Spoiler alert, we're going to talk a little bit about some warming in these regions. So I want to ask just if you've noticed warming throughout your lifetime. And kind of as Harry mentioned with the weather versus climate, you kind of can think about it maybe in like a few decades. Seen lots of yeses so far. Maybe we'll give it another moment if anyone else wants to jump in there. All right, looks like 100% of the people here have noticed warming in their lifetime. All right, well, we have some graphs in a moment to validate that.
Yeah, so it's always nice to have that validation before we launch into the graphs. So as I mentioned, the rest of the session, we're going to try and break up into 2 sessions. The first is to talk about what's the same across all the ecosystem regions in the 2 territories, and then to talk about maybe some of the differences. But this was a little bit of foreshadowing because the major similarity across all the ecoregions in both territories is that the climate projection data, which, as Jeff mentioned, includes local weather observations, local climate data. It's all expected to get warmer as we go through the remainder of this century. So if I take the boreal forest area first, which is the majority, the largest eco-region in both territories, we have this average annual daily temperature graph. So that's an annual average, so a yearly average of the daily temperature. So over a 24-hour period, what is that average temperature? Starting from the 1950s, heading out to the end of the century. And there's 3 lines on this graph. To the left of the graph, we have the gray line, the gray squiggly line. And so those are the historical temperature record. That's the temperature that's been up to about the mid-2010s. After that, we have 2 different scenarios. And climate scientists use scenarios so that they can understand the various different options that the world, that the climate could have based on our greenhouse gas emissions. So we call these greenhouse gas emission scenarios. Scenario 1, which is the orange line, is the sort of do nothing scenario, the carry on as we are contributing greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. The second scenario, which is in blue, is our low greenhouse gas emissions scenario. So that's assuming that as a global population, we get together and we do begin to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions being released into the environment. So the boreal forest is expected to see the most significant temperature increases across Alberta, especially under the high greenhouse gas emission scenarios. That's scenario 1 in the orange, where temperatures in this region, in this ecosystem region, could rise by almost 8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And just to put that into some context, that's the sort of temperature, that's sort of the average annual daily temperature that you would expect to see in somewhere like Las Vegas, Nevada, or in Phoenix, Arizona. And so this dramatic warming would lead to major disruptions in the forest ecosystem, impacting wildlife such as moose and waterfowl, certainly changes in plant forms, so that could impact medicinal plants or other food sources. Permafrost thaw could also be an issue, and that disrupts all different kinds of natural habitats. It changes species composition for the different types of plants that we see, and can also impact infrastructure, roads, and things like that. In the Canadian Shield, so that's the area in northeast Alberta, so in the northeast of the lower Athabasca River territory. Again, we're seeing some pretty significant temperature changes, some pretty significant temperature rises. So again, the gray area is our historical temperature, and then our blue and orange represent our different scenarios. And so we're looking at about a 4-degree temperature increase by the time we get to the end of the century. And 4 degrees is kind of southern BC, northern parts of the US, kind of down towards California. Those kinds of temperatures are typically already experiencing about a 4-degree warmer than Alberta is right now. As the region's known for its rocky terrain and forest systems, so we're looking at potential changes in precipitation patterns. This could lead to droughts or other changes in the ecosystem, and that's fish species, the general drying up of the landscape could be impacted. As well, with temperature rises, we could see an increase in wildfires, as well as changes in the types of plants and animals that would live in the area and typically rely on cedar and birch trees for sustenance. In the foothills, moderate warming in this ecoregion. So this is the area between the Rocky Mountains and any sort of plains or grasslands area. But as mountain ecosystems see shift in vegetation zones, everything from sort of lower altitudes kind of moves out. And so this could have profound impacts for species that are adapted to those cooler, higher altitudes, as well as wildlife and plant life, but also water availability, and that's a big thing in the foothills. So changes in water availability is something that we could see in the foothills ecoregion in either warming scenario, and that's going to be impacting agriculture, forests, and wildlife that depend on snowmelt and cooler conditions. And then lastly is the parklands. And so moderate temperature rises is here, looking at sort of 4 degrees or so very similar to our last ecoregion. And this parkland area is quite interesting because temperature rise is really going to support a shift in the balance of forests and grasslands. That's leading to more forests heading into the grassland area. And so these are species that can thrive species that do thrive in a cooler environment will start to disappear, and species that like a warmer environment move in. So that's going to change how we use and interact with the land. The shift could also impact agricultural practices. Warmer temperatures can change how crops adapt, and we might need to use different crops or change water management practices, impacting farmers and food producers. And so those are 4 of our temperature scenario graphs for our 4 different ecoregions across both territories. And now we're going to have one more poll.
Thanks, Harry. I'll maybe just take a moment to say too, if anyone has any questions as we go through the material, please feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end to answer those. But right now we want to talk, Harry's shared a whole bunch of kind of terrifying information about different things that are predicted to happen with these changes. So kind of just want to touch in about how prepared you feel for some of these hazards like drought or wildfire. All of a sudden the Northeast having a climate like Las Vegas or the desert. It's a pretty big thing to think about. So if anyone wants to just answer this poll about how prepared you feel for this warming. A couple somewhat prepared, some not prepared. And just a reminder, this is what we're hoping to kind of talk about at the end. Is we're really looking for feedback of what would make you feel more prepared for some of these things coming down the line, hoping that we can accomplish some of those things. So great, some are prepared, a few not prepared. No one's feeling very prepared. Me neither. And with that, I'll throw it back to you, Harry.
Yeah, same here. Definitely not feeling prepared. I think we can all be in that boat. So we started with temperature as a way of unifying all of the different ecosystems that we have in these 2 territories. But one of the interesting things about climate change, or one of the realities about climate change, is that the higher temperatures projected across Alberta's ecosystems don't only increase the average temperature, but they also exacerbate, they also cause climate change hazards, impact, and risk specific to the region that we're talking about. And so for our 4 different ecosystems that we've got across our 2 territories, we're just going to take a little bit of time to break down what rising temperatures will mean in terms of specific impact. And we're going to try and focus on, additional hazards and risks. So what we're about to present is the things that are coming from these warmer temperatures. And so starting again with the boreal forest. And the three key points here are wildfires, permafrost thaw, and changes in biodiversity. And so as temperatures rise, wildfire risk will increase. And the boreal forest is, I think, as we probably all know, rich in coniferous trees, and is particularly vulnerable to wildfires as warmer and drier conditions provide the perfect conditions for them to spread. On permafrost thaw, which is particularly in the northern boreal forest, so northern Alberta, across the board in northern Alberta, is vulnerable to the warmer temperatures, and this will lead to things like soil instability, so ground shifting. It can impact infrastructure, plant growth, and wildlife habitat. And basically any one or anything that relies on stable land could be at risk here. And then changes in biodiversity. So this is as the warming could alter plant and animal species that are in the boreal forest. So these are predominantly cold adapted species, certain birds and mammals and plants. These could be potentially disappearing, and invasive species that thrive in warmer climates may take hold, which of course add another layer of disruption. The Canadian Shield, so back up in the northeast of Alberta, increase in flooding, changes in hydrology, so changes in the water system, and again, wildfires. So warmer temperatures can lead to more intense rainfall. It's a little bit of a paradox to in one hand say rising temperatures, whilst at the other saying more intense rainfall. And that's because as we get warmer temperatures, warmer air can carry more moisture. And so things like increasing flooding, increasing likelihood of flooding is definitely something that we have the potential to see. And this could disrupt, local ecosystems. It can cause property damage, obviously, and change water quality. These changes in hydrology and water also come from glaciers and snowpacks melting earlier in the spring. Water levels in rivers could then fluctuate and not be available later on in the summer, so impacting water availability for agriculture. Things like power generation and drinking water supplies could also be affected. And then, as I've mentioned, wildfires expected to increase. In the foothills, drought, glacier melt, and shift in vegetation. And so the foothill region will likely experience more frequent and more severe droughts as warmer temperatures reduce soil moisture and increase evaporation, so increased water being lost from the land. Similarly, glacier melt, so higher temperatures will accelerate the melting of glaciers in the Rocky Mountains, reducing that summer, that spring and summer snowmelt water supply that the foothills relies on into late spring and early summer, so reducing the water availability. And then shifts in vegetation. So the foothills may see a shift in what we call vegetation zones. So this is grasslands encroaching onto forest areas, so forests becoming more like grasslands and changing that natural balance of species. In the parklands, so our last of our 4 ecoregions, we're looking at shifts in ecosystems, flooding, and then some very particular agricultural risks. So the parkland region could see an increase in tree cover as forests move into areas that were previously grasslands. Flooding and erosion, so higher temperatures could lead to more intense rainfall events, as I've mentioned, and this is what could cause the flooding and soil erosion. And then increased temperatures may change growing seasons and change them so they're a little bit out of sync with traditional patterns. Things like heat stress can become more frequent, reducing crop yields. And then also the potential for increase in pests as well. And so across all 4 of our ecosystem regions and across all of Alberta, really, these are our 4 key areas that we're looking at and that are going to be driven by increased temperatures and the impacts of climate change. And so while each ecosystem will face its own unique combination of challenges due to raising temperatures, changes in water availability, increased risk from extreme weather, and disruption to livelihoods from these four hazards on the slide here are pretty constant. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jeff to draw our presentation to a close.
Thank you very much, Harry. Appreciate all that you shared with us. A little bit overwhelming, lots of challenges lie ahead. I know things are changing quickly, but we do have some time for adaptation, and I wanted to take a little bit of time here to talk about this term resilience. We've spoken about it a little bit today. It's part of the name of our organization, the Resilience Institute, and how important that is. You know, for Indigenous people, you know, people that I've spoken to over the years here talking about climate change, a lot of comments have been made that climate change is just another thing Indigenous people have to be resilient to. You know, it's just another challenge. You know, very significant challenges have already been overcome. So in that sense, I think it does give us some hope, and we do have the capacity and experience of resilience and a lot of resilience within our communities and our people, our families. I've also heard people talk about wishing that we didn't have to be resilient anymore. You know, it's been a lot of resilience, and you know, in this case, so it's not federal or provincial policies or anything like that. This is a challenge that's impacting us all that we need to come together for once again. So I'll talk about you know, a definition of resilience in a moment, but I also wanted to address this Cree term first that's on the slide here too. It's actually Northern Michif and Cree. It's also from the Métis Nation Climate Change Strategy. It's mentioned there, Sipigiso and Sipigiso. And if there's any you know, fluent speakers in the room, I apologize for my pronunciation there, but that's a term that they've chosen for resilience. And the root word of Sipigisoin is sipiu. Sipiu is a word that refers to something that's flexible or stretchy. And I think it's quite an apt word for the changes that we're going to have to make to become flexible, to become adaptive to the changes that we're going to be experiencing. Now, if we go to a dictionary definition of resilience, there's sort of two levels of resilience. We can think about individual resilience as well as community resilience. So personally, on the individual level, it's the ability of a person to adapt to, recover from, and bounce back from adversity of any kind, which obviously includes climate change. I think in our context as Indigenous people, as Métis people, you know, community ties and relationships have always been part of our resilience, always been part of our nature. And so that sense of coming together and working together to get through this, I think, is really important. So again, for community resilience, that's the ability of a community or group to anticipate, prepare for, and recover from adverse events. One more slide here. There's actually a little bit of work that's being done by the nation already, chatting with citizens about their experience of risks and also their sources of resilience. And so the diagram on the right there, we have a bit of a scale, and I always like to point out that our resilience outweighs the risks, and that we do have strengths that we're coming from. But the risks that have been identified already are cultural and land loss, as Harry's spoken about, and many of us have experienced, including myself. Some of the plants that I harvest and things that I like to collect aren't there anymore. Sloughs have dried up in my area, and so there is this feeling of loss, and it's a risk for especially for those of us who rely on the land for our sustenance. That obviously involves limited access to resources. Most of the sessions we've talked about, like the concept of mental health issues, is also a really important one, as Ali's mentioned, and I think we've all mentioned and understand the changes that we're looking at and that we're starting to experience already are deeply troubling, and they're very challenging. And I think in today's world, there's already you know, a lot of mental health. I think people are becoming more aware of mental health issues, and this is only going to add to that as well. And then historical trauma as well, and that's kind of related to the loss of land and access to our resources that might, you know, trigger some people who were removed from land and removed from their homelands through federal government policies. And so there might be some historical traumas that are triggered as well. On the other side, for resiliency, we do have our own traditional ecological knowledge. We have our knowledge of the land and how to make use of it, how to use it respectfully, sustainably. We do have our community and family relationships, which I think are going to be crucial in helping us get through all of this. We have our spiritual and cultural practices, and I actually think Métis people are very rich in that there are traditional kind of people and Christian, and there are many different spiritual people within the Métis Nation in Alberta. And all of those are going to be helpful. We're going to need all the supports that we can get. And then, of course, just like CPIGISO and being adaptable, being flexible, and having that ability to change is also going to be important. And so that kind of leads us a little bit into our discussion. Ali's going to share a few more words with us to get us going. But thank you for your attention. I look forward to chatting in a few minutes here.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'll maybe just stay back on that slide for a second, Terry. So we've talked a lot about risks and a little bit about resilience, but I just want to maybe take a moment to talk about actions. And you can see the words climate risk and vulnerability assessment on the screen here, and it was in the session title. And just wanted to kind of maybe take a moment to explain what we're doing and that we are taking action on this. So the data we just heard is from this bigger project where we're looking at risks across Alberta. Part of a really thorough background to better understand the future impacts so we can be prepared and hopefully more resilient. And like this is a Métis specific project. This is the Otipemisiwak Métis government doing this to be more prepared so citizens are less affected. And so part of this engagement, the session today is obviously we want to share some of that information and share the knowledge. But we also want to know after hearing this, if there's anything you think might help kind of tip that resiliency scale even more. And I just wanted to maybe offer a few things because I know this is a huge topic. Some things we've heard from citizens already is that, it can be really hot in the summer in urban environments specifically. And like when you have bouts of hot days, like in Alberta, we're pretty good at dealing with the cold, but the extreme heat can be really hard. So maybe like something people could use are like air conditioning units. We've also heard from harvesters that lakes are getting warmer and like algae is exploding and leading to less oxygen and it's affecting fish health. So we're monitoring fish health in lakes that harvesters use. We also know that citizens have experienced evacuations from wildfires, like in Jasper. We just hired an emergency management manager. So I know this is a big topic, but I just wanted to take a moment to say that we are doing lots of this work. I know we're about to kind of jump into a discussion, but just so you know, we aren't relying on the several people in this room to talk to for guidance about what we need to do in Northern Alberta to be prepared for climate change. We, of course, welcome any kind of feedback and are so happy to hear from folks, but just want to say it's not all on you. So with that, we will move into the discussion portion, but just wanted to take a moment I haven't seen any questions in the chat, but maybe this will be the kind of point that we stop the recording, move into the discussion, and then we can have a conversation that won't get posted on the internet. So I'm just going to pause the recording here.